5 yeses.
All right. Welcome back to the Institute for Hermetic Studies 2026 Annual Conference. We have an amazing question and answer panel. And before we get to that, did you know we have a website? I'm sure no one here has heard that we have a website at instituteforhermeticstudies.org. We are sunsetting our teachable courses, but everything is offered on our new website and platform. And if you've purchased a class on Teachable, we will get everyone information so you can contact us, and we will honor that on the new platform to make sure your investment in the continuity of the Western esoteric tradition is not wasted. So we have a panel here. John Michael Greer, Mark Stavish, Ike Baker. This is a wonderful opportunity. And as a question and answer, that means we demand questions that you don't want to ask, and they will give answers that you don't want to hear. I think that's how it works, right? They will be taking questions directly from the audience and from the chat. So I'd ask that the panel here, if you could repeat the question so that everybody in both the room and through Zoom are clear on what's being asked you. All right, can we get a warm round of applause for our panelists?
There we go. So who's first? Throw something at us.
It's for all three of you. I'd like a relatively, rapt response, but I wanted to know how you guys all feel about the place of a devotional practice compared to more technical aspects of esotericism or more mystical and contemplative aspects.
So the question, I'll just repeat the question. Gentleman wants to know what our thoughts are on the differences between a strictly devotional practice versus more, I guess, technical ceremonial magic, a la, Kabbalistic ritual, so on. So is that what you're getting at?
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts?
You go.
I go. Okay. Well, I think one of the most important parts of working with, when you're doing a devotional, much of the time, hopefully, you're working with what we would consider a deity, a higher order, sort of, spiritual intelligence or ordering principle, however you want to put it. To me, it's important in this that we don't just take. I don't think that's how you develop a relationship with things like that. And anybody who does a devotional practice, and you can do devotional practice magically. You can do it ceremonial, actually. But anybody that has a devotional practice will likely tell you it's about the long haul. It's about forming a relationship with that deity. And you can't just take. You've got to give before you can get. And to get a little technical, and I'll kind of like wrap that up, you look at somebody like the ancient Neoplatonist Iamblichus, right, who was like the theurgy guy, the guy who talks so much about, he gives us so much in De Mysteriis, on the mysteries, about the way that he was contextualizing and working with these deities. And he basically says the whole goal of theurgic ceremonial is to raise the person, to develop the soul, the psyche, the highest part of the soul, the nous, the divine intelligence, to elevate that to the point where it remembers that it is akin to the gods. So it's not only just giving in terms of, sacrifice. It's about eros, desire, love, and when I work with deities, I tell students to, I don't grovel. I don't grovel. I don't, get on my knees and I'm lesser than. It kind of defeats the purpose if you're working in a hieratic context, which that's what I try to do. Rather, I try to, honor, right? That's what the archaic form of worship really means, is to give honor. That's why we call in Freemasonic ritual, the guy in the East is the worshipful master. It's not because we bow to him, and some people do, but it's because he's honorable. It's the worshipful. It's an honorable office, station, position. So I render honor the same way that I would render honor to any of my friends here. You come to my house, I give you a cup of coffee, I ask you, offer you water, and then we have our conversation and things of that nature. So that's my take on it. But if you're asking about the differences, I don't think that they're strictly different, or have to be anyway, because I work in primarily theurgic ceremonial, which says that the whole purpose of the ritual is to render devotion, and that elevates us. Effectively, prayer is the efficient cause of this stuff. The Amicus says, if you do not pray, if there's no prayer, a theurgic ritual is useless. So I'll tap out for that.
I like, for practical reasons, and especially when teaching people, to draw a distinction between religion and magic. I know that's kind of a shaky line to draw, and strong arguments can be made that they blend into each other and so on. But for merely practical reasons, when you're talking about wanting to make changes in your life, which is a valid goal for magic, you may want to do that in a religious context, but you may not be doing so in a religious context. You may simply be transforming your own self-image, for example, or what have you. Some people are more drawn to devotional work than others. Dion Fortune used to draw a distinction between the mystic, who is primarily devotional, and the occultist, who is primarily technical. Both paths lead to higher places, but they don't actually lead to the same place. And it's not necessary that they should. One of the things that I find really problematic about a certain kind of rhetoric that's very common, you hear all this stuff about there are many roads up the same mountain. I don't think it's just one mountain. I think there are a lot of different mountains. They all have really good views, but they're different views. And so it's not a matter of paths going up a mountain. There's, basic human ordinary life is kind of the village down in the valley. And you can go from that village up one path or another to various mountains. And the sort of high devotional mysticism is one of those mountains. It's a very important mountain. It's a mountain that many people find very important in their lives. I do, for example. But it's not necessarily a path for everybody. And so one of the things that I've really had to grapple with as I've expanded my own exposure to different traditions of magical spirituality and so on is, there's a lot of different options out there. So it's kind of a buffet, and I would encourage everyone to try some of each of the foods, but which one you like may vary. As I like to say, your mileage may vary. So, worship. The original form of that word, Middle English, worthship. Having worth. Wow. Okay. So when you are offering worship to a god, you are recognizing the god's worthship, recognizing the god's value to you. So, and no grumbling. I mean, unless you're really into that kind of submissive role, if that's what turns you on, that's fine.
Kinky devotional.
You laugh. There's a huge amount of it out there.
I told you we weren't during the 80s.
But no, you don't. My experience with deities is they find that rather unpleasant and embarrassing. So.
I think if we just look at the word, it is to be devoted or committed to something, which means there is a certain conviction, confidence, if you will, or faith. And the faith is not a blind faith, although we often start out with, just roll the dice and see what we get. But then from the experiences, that relationship or conviction becomes more solidified, more stronger, more concrete. When we try to divide this up, we have to say, even if someone is on a ceremonial path, we'll call it that, a path of pure experimentation, that's still one which they are emotionally connected and devoted to. So the emotional context is still there. It's just channeled slightly differently. I think then if we look at then devotion in the sense of the theurgic practice, the offering, when we move into the notion of offerings or sacrifice, we say, what do we give this to the gods for? If you do them in different other systems, and well, they don't need them, but it's developing this notion of not only overcoming your own selfishness and sense of limitation, your narrowness, your meanness of mind and heart, but it is a way of, again, treating this notion of friendship and relationship, which then moves into the notion of action. So what is the service that we're rendering? So this notion of service and action, you're committed to this form of practice. So in a sense, if we want to use the idea, we've covered all our bases on the wheel with the elements, or we've covered all our bases, if you will, in the notion of the four principal yogas that Vivekananda talks about. So we can't really separate them out. Even the worst of, we'll say, even the archetypal black magician is still one who is devotional. They're devoted to their own means. The actions, or the action and the sacrifice, is all about that relationship to me and what I want and getting. So it all is present there, even if it's in a way that we don't necessarily see. And then you can see that too if you look at other people and the way they practice. There's this, again, ripple effect or secondary causes, if you will. So, and then within that framework, you find out what you really enjoy. So even the systems that we see that develop ritual, the ritual is, even if it's, I don't want to say it's perfunctory, but it's not what we think of as ceremonial. For our Amorc friends here, I'll say, like within the Rosicrucian order, Amorc, they have these kind of opening and closing rituals. That's still ritual. It's still part of the practice. It's still part of it, but it's not the same as what we would think of as high theurgy. But it actually has some closer relationship in some ways to classical theurgy, although not precise. So that's my answer.
Good question. Thanks for the question.
John, you mentioned yesterday the gentleman who talked to the UFO and ended up rehashing his own, I think it was either New Age or Hermetic theory. So how do we, for the whole group, avoid rehashing our own subconscious in our either educational or spiritual?
Okay, the question is about one of the people I brought up in my talk yesterday, George Adamski, who was a spiritual teacher in the Los Angeles scene, running an organization called the Royal Order of Tibet. It had nothing to do with royalty or Tibet, by the way, but taught standard, mid-20th century American occultism. And then when he started talking to UFOs, gosh, the Space Brothers started teaching exactly the same thing. Okay, and the question is, how do we keep from doing that same sort of thing? Well, first of all, it really helps if you're not faking it. Now, I think Adamski was not a simple fraud. Adamski wanted very badly to get these teachings out, and it's not as I don't imagine that any Western esoteric tradition has ever faked up a set of documents or so on, claiming an origin that it didn't have. I perish thought that anybody.
You're looking at me.
Looking at all that here, but that kind of thing was absolutely bog standard at the time, and so Adamski's sole unique feature there was he was the first person who he actually wasn't even the first person who thought of palming off this stuff on the Space Brothers. John Balu Nubro, in the almost unpronounceable sacred book Oaspe, did the same thing back in the late 19th century. He channeled by way of automatic typing on a typewriter this immense scriptural object, all about the Space Brothers and so on. But at any rate, Adamski was following in that tradition. It was not a matter of subconscious borrowing. It was a matter of very clearly, very deliberate borrowing as a way to give his teachings the kind of exciting romantic background that would get people interested in them. Okay. Now, if that's what you want to do, I don't know that I can stop you. I will say that it's not necessary these days. One of the things that happened when I became the head of a Druid order, for example, is that I sat the old guard down and said, okay, I want us to be honest about the origins of our teachings. They do not date back to the ancient Druids and some vast myths of Celtic antiquity. This is from the Druid revival. This is a tradition that emerged in the 18th century. And I think we should admit that. They were aghast. They were saying, nobody's going to join if you say that. You got to have the romantic origin. But I said, no, let's give it a try. In fact, it worked very well. At this point, it is quite possible to do without that. So if you were thinking that you had to channel Space Brothers, you don't, seriously. In terms of how you're going to keep subconscious factors like that from doing well, to the extent that the subconscious, you can't. Unless you can bring all of your subconscious contents to consciousness, which I don't think any incarnate human being can do, you're pretty much stuck. So just live with it and be aware that, yes, you will be unconsciously repeating things that you read in a Jane Roberts book when you were in high school. That kind of thing happens. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's some good points there, as always. John is inspirational for me when he speaks. But I've mentioned that I at least fancy myself as practicing or trying to model my practice on an ancient form of ceremonial devotional that we call theurgy. But I don't have these misgivings that I'm doing what they did because it's unnecessary. Because they were, Amicus talks about this in On the Mysteries, he was doing his best to sort of reconstruct what was going on 1,000 years before him. So it's an evolution. And the main point is that I want to tack on to what John said is this is tied into discovering or bringing to light your subconscious. You got to figure out your why. What is attracting you to this idea, this obsession? I don't mean anybody in particular, but this general sentiment that older is better, is always better. That's not the case. And we got to let that go, because ultimately what that is to me, in my experience, that impulse is maybe at its root, that quote unquote Gnostic itch, right? That is ineffable to a degree. That's the root, but it's filtered through this subconscious desire for adventure and something. Our heads are pumped full of stuff like Dan Brown and National Treasure and all this stuff, and so we want to take this high adventure that is modeled for us. I mean, even things like Zanoni, we're going back into this tradition where it's like these Rosicrucian adventures. We all want to style ourselves as the Odysseus or the Jason or something like that of that great sort of adventure cycle. You got to figure out, is that what you want? I watched a movie. I love this movie. It's called The Departed, right? For anybody there's this scene where Leonardo DiCaprio is playing this cop, and he's just out of the academy, and he's sort of applying to become a cop. And he comes from a very rough family. They were gangsters on the street, and the guy Martin Sheen, who's playing the commissioner, looks at him. He says, "Do you want to be a cop, or do you want to appear to be a cop?" And so nice. That occurred to me early on. It's like, wait, hold on. Now that I kind of understand a little bit where this is going, I think it's time to drop that whole kind of occultist aesthetic. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. You can put it back on maybe, but you've got to know that it's there. And because that will screw you up. And I'll let Mark and John have way more experience with this stuff than I do. So I'd love to hear their thoughts on that stuff. But the last piece that I'll add is subconscious interference in vision work, channel work. It is always going to be there. In Kabbalistic terms, we call this interference of the individual ruach. It's everything has to get filtered through your quote unquote 7 planets, your inner planets, and those are not as orderly as the cosmic planets. They don't repeat their cycles. And as Plato said, the cycles are screwed up in individuals. Part of this work is learning to equilibrate that stuff, but you will have all of this stuff inevitably filtered through there. One of the things, and this is for beginners, obviously, one of the things that we train people in esoteric orders is in assimilating into their themselves, their psyche, their microcosm, what we call a symbolic vocabulary. Why? Because a lot of your imagery is personal to you. Okay, I'm doing a path working on the 29th path of Resh on the Tree of Life, and Big Bird is here. Well, it's wonderful to see you, but what the hell do you have to do with this working here? The effect there, and I'm being facetious to make a point, the effect there is that the personal image is rising to the fore. Now, when you learn things like the Hebrew alphabet or the Coptic alphabet or the symbols of astrology, that's the planets, the zodiac signs, and things of that nature, at least within I would say, a Golden Dawn and its derivative tradition, in that context, what you're doing is you are learning symbols that are in some way expressing universal concepts rather than strictly personal. That's the best you can get. I mean, a lot of the times, as John said, it's not going to be perfect, but I would say it's certainly, again, it allows you to make that distinction, to have that realization that some of my personal imagery, my personal predilections, my bias is coming through. So let me defer to assimilating, really getting this symbolic vocabulary to the point where it's like language. I'm just speaking. I'm not thinking about what I'm saying necessarily at that level. But yeah.
And I'm gonna insert one thing here.
Sure.
If I were on the path of Resh and I encountered Big Bird, I'd be pleased because we're talking a big yellow solar figure, okay, who is traditionally friendly. So this is a good sign.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I would challenge him with the appropriate divine names and so on.
There you go.
We'd have a nice little conversation, then I'd go further up Sesame Street.
You made the most of that, John, actually.
I once had somebody challenge me to explain why Bina is symbolized by a tomato sandwich. It's incredibly easy. A sandwich has three. There's the bread, the tomato, and the bread, right? There's the threefold. Red is one of the colors of Bina, tomato colored. Okay, we can go on from there.
Yeah.
Demeter and the grain. And you see, one of the things that is very useful to do is this kind of, in that kind of training, is this kind of absurd occult 20 questions thing. If you can assimilate anything to a given symbolism, you really know that you've started to embody that symbolism. You can actually think with it and speak with it. It should be a language, not a straitjacket.
Beautiful.
Now it's all to my head is Quipaltic Snuffleupagus.
Well, Big Bird was his best friend.
That's the reverse side. Yeah, don't go there.
Quipaltic Snuffleupagus is the perfect garage band name.
When you look at the question of why do we prefer something older, it's not just a pious fraud. It's why do we do a pious fraud? And it's to inculcate confidence. The ultimate point of all of these practices is to inculcate, experience, and allow us to actualize a kind of ultimate self-confidence. Not in a naive sense, or not in a sense of I think, but in I am. I am. That's why we always say that's the most powerful invocation there is. Moses saw the burning bush and said, who are you? And he heard, I am that I am. And we say, man is made in God's own image, but then man returns the favor, And the problem being is my uncle was a great uncle was hypnotist said, I am is the most powerful thing you can say. The problem is we fill in the blank after it. And there's some practices we did in IHS about that. How comfortable are you just simply saying I am? And then you notice all this kind of stuff, identifiers that flood your mind. So within this framework, we're looking for confidence, something we can believe in so that we can ultimately come to believe in ourselves. And that's the role of the teacher. That's the role of the fellowship of practitioners. We'll call the household of the faithful, okay? Thus, when we look at our own mind, are the teachings turning you to look and examine the contents of your own mind? In most cases, not. They're telling you to memorize all these symbols and ideas, but really not why. They give a sense of why, like was heard here, but then you're already taking something that is full and trying to put more into it. Whereas we have to learn to observe our thoughts and not be carried away by them. And this is where good mental training comes in. This is where most of the magical orders derived from the Golden Dawn are a failure. I mean, a total failure. They don't really have good mental training on that. They're good at the ritual part, and they're good at the memorization part. But the self-inward reflection, what would be preliminary practices, because ultimately that's what you're going to do near the end of the path too. That's not there. So there has to be a good sense of that training. And for this, then this is why, and we were talking earlier about that in terms of before we began with dreams, why lucid dreaming is so important. Because with lucid dreaming, you recognize that you are dreaming. So we say one is awake within the context of their own mind, which means you're beginning to recognize that what you're experiencing is a self-generated phenomenon. And if it is self-generated, you can begin to take some control over it and therefore change it. So lucid dreaming is important in that domain. When we look at the understanding of symbols, we are then we hear the phrase, the language of the birds a lot. One of the ways to approach that is to recognize that the language of the birds is just that. It is a spoken language. It is a sound. So we see in Fulcanelli, he gives descriptions about this kind of phonetic Kabbalah. So the dreamscape works in the same way. So when you have a dream and you're trying to understand what it is, it's often good if you speak it out loud, because in the speaking of it, you'll understand the symbolism a little better. There's a period where we transition between this purely individual content, which is just really just mostly meaningless to us anyhow, because we don't even understand it because we haven't examined it, to this more meaningful content. And we try to shape it, as was said, with symbolic understanding of things. This is where you can get crazy with gematria.
Yeah.
And I mean literally crazy.
Yeah.
I don't mean that jokingly, seriously, because you try to look for too much meaning in things. You're connecting dots in everything you see around the world, and the dots simply aren't there. But within your own mind, you have to look at what is this thing. And I remember, I'll only tell you part of it. There is a experience in which I leave my house, the house in which I grew up in. I walk outside, so you have a threshold moment, pretty common. But then there are two cars out front, and they're side to side so that they have a large roof, a large flat roof platform. And there's, of course, with this 8 wheels altogether. The point here that was important is the vehicles. There were the two vehicles, which had particular meaning for what was going on at the time in the system, and then the 8 wheels. The 8 wheels had a particular. So you see, that's you try to distill it down. Okay, there's other stuff that will go on, but if you try to do it that way, so. Josh, what was the word? What word did we use? We were talking about the dream. I think I said, say the word out loud, something about it. When you say the word, it has a different context. So just try to do that and let it go and not to be. But you have to write this down too. You have to write them down. And when you write your dreams down in the beginning, it's not because they have any meaning. You're just training yourself to remember. That's all. And then later on, you begin to recognize which ones have meaning. So at some point, as you become, mostly our experiences are only within the framework of our own mind. And I'm convinced that with the unfortunate and the rising on the plains that she talks about was all within the framework of Yetzirah. Now, what I mean by that is it was all within her own mind. When you then, and I don't like this language, by the way, but I'm just using it because it's what we use. When you can become more self-aware, even temporarily, that's when we talk about the actual astral planes. That is a objective psychic domain like this one. Most things don't take place in that. They don't. They could, but they don't, and people confuse that. So what we're looking at here is, again, the mental training. So I hope that helps.
At a time when we're seeing declining attention spans, critical thinking skills, and literacy rates among a lot of Westerners, Americans in particular, one might be forgiven for being a little pessimistic about what the future of esotericism looks like and the caliber of the average student and their ability to do this work. Plus, we're seeing more of a trend of solo practitioners and I think less of the transmission between teacher and student. So with those factors, what factors do you see for optimism for the future of esotericism, if you are optimistic about the future of esotericism?
Okay. I'm actually very optimistic for several reasons. First of all, it may be true that the overall levels of literacy, critical thinking, etc., are declining. They were a lot lower in the Renaissance. Okay. We have a long way to fall before we get down to the point where it's equal to one of the great golden ages of Western esotericism. It was lower still when Iamblichus was running around. Okay. One of the points that tends to get lost is that this is never a mass phenomenon. This is always, this kind of work, this kind of esoteric spirituality is the province of a self-selecting minority of freaks and geeks and weirdos who are interested in this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I've noticed in particular over recent years, kind of hard to miss, there has been more attention paid to serious occult traditions in the last 10 years than at any point in my lifetime. The pop culture occultism that I talked about and made fun of during my session yesterday, it's all very attractive, it's all very fun, and the book covers are so engagingly tacky. But there was not a lot of serious occult stuff available in that decade. Growing up, or coming of age in the 1970s, becoming interested in occultism, I had the munificent banquet of Golden Dawn or Aleister Crowley or Wicca. That was it. That's what was available. There were like 6 tarot decks available at that time in the stores that I could get to. Things have changed. The fact that Ike could reference Iamblichus, and probably everybody in this room knows exactly who he's talking about, that's a major change. Now, the people moving away from groups into solo practice, partly that's a function of, as I see it, the transition from the Piscean to the Aquarian age. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, the planet of unities. And so all the Piscean religions, for example, focus on the group. It's the body of Christ. It's the Sangha. It's the Summa, the collection of the believers. It's all a collective thing. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, which is the planet of individual whack jobs, like everybody in this room, myself included. Okay, so there's going to be a push in that direction. One of the major things driving it is that so many of us have experienced so many dysfunctional magical groups, and so many magical groups in which the effort to maintain a group ate up the available energy that might otherwise have gone into practice. One of the things that I'm working toward right now is developing certain initiations that are very much focused on one initiator, one initiate. For example, I'm busy. I'm a Martinist free initiator, and one of the things I'm working on is a set of the 3 Martinist initiations that are one-on-one. It's not hard, but being able to do it that way, you no longer have the complexities of running a chapter. Now, this may seem kind of radical, but in South and East Asia, this is how all initiations have been done for the last 5,000 years. There's a guru, there's a chela, and somehow I think it works for them. My suggestion is maybe it's time to begin migrating into that sort of approach. I have found people very open to that. They don't want to get involved in group process. They don't want to have to spend, hours at a time bickering over who's going to bring the forks. They would like to, meet with people when that's appropriate, when there's something to be done, like receiving an initiation. and just get on with it, in the immortal words of God from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So, for those reasons, I don't think there's anything to worry about in the future of occultism, as long as all of us get up off our duffs and get working on it, and try to rework our personal approaches so that they will work in this transitional period. So,
Yeah, beautifully said. Also, like Louis Claude de Saint Martin, that's probably how he transmitted all of it.
Papu didn't get his degree, didn't get his initiation in a lodge.
Right.
It was one person. That's normal.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that would have been the same case if you look at the Hermetic texts and stuff like that. It's always, Hermes to Tot,
Exactly.
or Asclepius, so it's one-on-one.
The thing that happened was that Freemasonry became the acknowledged template for initiation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so everyone thought, oh, we have to have a lodge. And then all of the small group politics and everything else involved in that sort of piled into the situation.
Well, and I think also it helped seed the generation, or a generation of people who could bring us to where we are now, as you're saying. So everything kind of has a place. Who in this room remembers puberty? Right? I mean, your voice cracks. It's uncomfortable. It's kind of awful, but it's a liminal. It's a cliche term. I don't like to use it. But let's say it's a transitional stage, okay, of going from one point to another. And those always kind of suck. There's a pain because you're divesting yourself of what you know, and you're not certain what is coming down the pipe. And that's part of magical training, is learning how to not get in the damn way so much. And so I look at that almost as like, for people that are interested in this stuff and having to live during this time, I ask frequently, why the hell? Why now? I might have excelled in the Renaissance, but also lots of painful stuff there. So I think that's what we're going through. And I always think that there's hope. Anybody that kind of like watches my podcast or takes any of my classes, they probably hear a lot of cynicism, because sometimes, for lack of a better word, it's good for your diet to eat the shit sandwich, so to speak. Pardon my language. But I don't think that we are hopeless. I see a lot of optimism. I just see, like, we're in it. We're in the trenches. We're going through it right now. The voice is cracking. The pants, we got to start buying different clothes. It's an uncomfortable thing, but we have seen this before, where it's this oscillation. If anybody's familiar with the Tzimtzum of Kabbalah, the creation of the universe by expansion and then contraction, expansion, contraction. All organizations have to go through that. All organizations, movements, I should say, that take the vehicle in phenomenal materiality of organizations, they have to contract and get down to that core fire, where it's like there's no flame, but it's almost smoldering, or something like that. Like the metal is so hot it's bright red, but there's no flame, and then from there it expands, because the authenticity, as John said earlier, always helps if you're not faking it.
If you can fake authenticity, then you've got it made.
Yeah. Then you're a magician. Then you're an adept. But we have to go through those periods, and the final point I put on it is that you can't destroy the what we're all after. The systems will come and go. Even our ability to sort of intuit or understand certain of this stuff will wax and wane as a population, but it's always there. And that's why, again, to go back to the point of, not necessarily chasing ancient stuff for the wrong reasons. For instance, a really good example is Freemasonry. Somebody asked me recently, like, do you think that Freemasonry actually came from ancient Egypt? I'm like, I don't care. I look at it in a similar way where it's like, I don't, Jacob, I know you. I don't know your family. I know you kind of topically. I don't know where you come from, but you've got certain mannerisms. You've got certain facial gestures that are at least seemingly kind of unconsciously repetitive. And in some of those things in people, you get a little bit of a glimpse of their ancestors that still lives on in them, in those small affectations and those things. They don't know what they're doing. That's the way I would look at something like Freemasonry, because it doesn't matter to me where it came from so much as what it is today. But at the same time, you can see that, wow, even if there's not a paper trail of lineage, a family tree, so to speak, we're still picking up on it. It's still there. I don't know necessarily why. I can't explain. I can't articulate it. Maybe Mark could, but it always, somebody or some group of people finds it, picks up the ball, and carries it a couple more yards.
Well, I think we have to look at several factors. I remember 25 years ago, someone asked Jean Dubuis what was the greatest threat to esotericism or the spirituality of the future. And his word was indifference. Indifference. And indifference takes on many forms because it's about one's relationship to something. I'm indifferent to it. Or I am not. Because as we said, eros is really the force of it all. So if we're going to be looking at relationships, the reason the lodges fall apart, as we know, is because they don't know how to have healthy relationships. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that those individuals will have healthy spiritual lives outside of the group, if they can't do it within the group. So if we look at the notion of the teacher-student relationship or the initiator relationship, if we want to do the comparison to the master and the cella, that's almost a lie, because you don't have the cultural relationship that supports that. If someone comes and wants initiation into the chain and you tap them on the shoulder and off they go, there's no real relationship there. And what allows someone not to fall into the mess of their own mind is someone who has managed to get out of their own mind, and that means a relationship. That's why within the Tantras, the guru is the dangerous friend. Not because they put you in difficult situations, but they also know how to get you out of them, and they know how to force you to confront things which you don't want. So if you want to have a real teacher-student relationship, not just an initiator-initiate relationship, because we can pass the thread along initiator to initiate, but we're not really part of the real chain, to use the language. There's not real strength there, because you're only, as the unfortunate says, the group is only, or the tradition is only as strong as its weakest link. So the question is, what even in that one-on-one is the relationship between the initiator and initiate? So that is, what is my relationship to this stream before me and the stream after me? As we've often talked, and we had some video on our platform on how to practice, and how do you recognize those who've gone before you? Most of the systems I know, they just want to do their invoking rituals and call upon deities and some archangels to do their stuff, because that's kind of the way it's presented in the written material, which is the problem with written material. If that's all you have, you can only interpret it through your own experience, and that puts a block around it. So how many of you then, sit and contemplate everything that has gone through to get to you here, so that you can have that experience? Are you, as I asked in the one question, are you part of a tradition? And the tradition is not just the idea of initiation, but it's a view, a philosophical view that has a past, it has a present, and then in theory you are helping to move that view because you find it useful in your life into the future. And that involves how you deal with other people. As someone who taught philosophy on the college level as recent as last fall, I can say that the students there found, when I introduced them to the ideas of Neoplatonism, and particularly the role of the imagination in the Renaissance, they found that very interesting. They had never been exposed to it. For some, this is the best class. But their capacity for work is very limited. So if your capacity to work with your mind is very limited, you have to develop it. Because you can't go within your own mind if you can't focus or concentrate, or if you can't relax. So we could get into all sorts of discussions of Ahriman and all this technological and demonic stuff through evil, and I'll say it's all true from a point of view. So what we saw and what we're seeing is what I said 4 years ago, 5 years ago, David Metcalf, is a bifurcation. And that bifurcation is increasing. So yes, it is self-selecting. But at the same time, as I know Capo and others and I have talked about, we are in the last generation of people who know how to look at what AI is telling us and know whether it's real or not. So, I mean, the optimism is a matter of, yes, it will survive, but that's not what I'm here about. If I cared about it, if all I wanted was the survival of it, we'd never have these meetings. I might not even have written what I wrote. Let someone else do it. The books are already there. What do we care? I've done enough work. I've done enough for 10 lifetimes. I don't say that lightly. IHS collection, we got 900 volumes there, more coming in. That's enough. But those are curated volumes. It's not just anything. So we're awash in information, but people don't even know what to do with it. And that's been a problem too, as we've often talked about with groups. The problem is you join a group and you're very dedicated to it because you only have so much time and so much resources. But it doesn't have maybe enough of the moving parts. So then maybe you reach out and join another group, and then they don't integrate well, they don't digest well. So you're trying to make this up as you go along, and all you're getting is psychic indigestion. And that's why I wrote that one essay. That's why in the end everyone goes and becomes Tibetan Buddhist, because that's the MacBook of modern spirituality. You don't have to keep doing patches and adding stuff in. So we have to look at how well integrated is the systems that we're presenting. So if we want esotericism to be really so self-selecting that only those, and I know Bob Smith says this much to everyone's annoyance, but there's a lot of truth to it. Everyone with an IQ of 115 are the only ones who can really do it, then fine. But then a lot of the groups that we joke about and have some experience from probably would never have existed. So, yes, am I optimistic? Yes, but only because of the work I've done and the work of the folks at IHS. Not because I trust in anyone else to do it, because there's too much indifference in it. There's too much indifference out there. There's too many threats to our spiritual survival right now that we should not ignore. And being awash in information is one of them. Most of these, and let's really stick a fork in it. Most of the publications out there are worthless. Most of these gourmet grimoires are worthless. What have they really done for anyone? You know how many times I've sat down? I'm at TJ's there, and he sits here to talk to this girl. How many times I've sat next to some 20-year-old girl who decided to get some demon tattoo off TikTok. On her skin. So they think, the life is in the blood. They think this is okay. And I said, well, how's your life going? Well, I thought this was a good idea. So we're awash in information, but TikTok is your primary source of information. So you're all a bunch of solo practitioners running off the same cliff thinking how special you are. You cannot escape the role of the teacher, the teachings, and the household of the faithful. It is impossible. Because even if you are a solo practitioner, you're dependent on what came before you. So there is a Luciferian pride in this idea that I can do it all on my own. Because you're not doing it on your own. You may be choosing on your own what to do, but you're completely dependent on only what is available to you, which is because of what happened in the past. And people ask me, Jean Dubuis, because he was a big proponent of, how do we get out of these dysfunctional egregores? Because, we saw them. We knew what he was talking about back then. Many of you don't. But it was kind of very peculiar. But at the same time, he was talking to a group of people who all had 10, 15, 20 years of experience in esotericism. So for them to go out on their own is simple. And I think that's where we look at it. That's why we set the Institute up as kind of within the real framework of a college. We're not going to bother giving initiations or any of that, because why bother? It's a lot of trouble. But at the same time, if we teach you enough and you apply it, and we have help to help you, and you want to avail of that, then you can train yourself sufficiently, because in the end, we all train ourselves. Like my wife said, in the end, you have to teach yourself biology. Okay? In the end, you have to teach yourself music. Well, like John said, try and teach yourself Tai Chi off of a record.
I'm so looking forward to that.
I know. And I know exactly which one you're talking about. I've seen it, and when I see it again, I'll get it for you.
I'll let you know if I get it first. That's so funny.
That's the framework. It's even the notion of individualism, the hyper-individualism, is just as, we'll say, clipothic or dysfunctional as the notion of hyper-collectivism. So that's my take on that. Next question. New question.
Really into what you were just talking about was sort of getting into my question, because like I say, I'm a solo and sort of self-trained. The best way to describe it is you're your fourth way, not all knowledge is in your school. When you found new information, how do you integrate it into what you've already known? And then once you finish that out, how do you reiterate it to recycle and reverge and find the things that you didn't understand in the previous path and reintegrate that into what you're doing? That makes sense?
Yeah, how do you eat from the buffet and not vomit?
Not get sick, yeah.
Well, I think I'm gonna take the first shot at this one, because that was very much how I found my way into occultism. Growing up in the South Seattle suburbs, I did not exactly have access to a vast array of lodges and things like that, especially as a geeky teenager with no social skills. Okay. What I had was books. And a typically autistic willingness to obsess about them completely. So I ended up, because as I mentioned, what there was Aleister Crowley, Wicca, or the Golden Dawn. Wicca's never turned my crank, and Aleister Crowley has always annoyed me. So the Golden Dawn it was, and I started. And was there a Golden Dawn temple anywhere within 1,000 miles? Not as far as I can tell. Not in the late second half of the 1970s. So what I had to go on was a collection of books that I could, and there weren't that many of them in print at that point. I was dealing with, a couple of those garish paperbacks to start with. And so I did some stuff. I stumbled my way into a workable set of daily practices, and I kept at it. And gradually amassed a fair Golden Dawn collection and kept at it. And it was about 15 years after I started that I encountered my first teacher. And that was a strange experience. And but by that time I had already, it was a little while after that I had my first initiatory experience. And so this kind of thing, my whole path has been a matter of, scrambling up the muddy surface of a trail, zigzagging up a rock. And I think this is true of most people these days. Despite the efforts of groups like the IHS, there really isn't much in the way of an opportunity for people to sign up for a course of esoteric training that will take them all the way through. You can get some training, but you're probably going to have to go somewhere else to get this initiation, and there's always stuff lacking. And so you piece it together. As for how do you do it, doubtless there are many good ways to do it, but myself and everyone I know, have done it largely by trial and error. Now, I have had the good fortune of being able to write a number of instructional books that are trying to give people a more coherent experience, a specific course of practices that will direct them toward that inward reflection, that will direct them toward that engagement with the tradition, and hopefully take them someplace. Those are among my most popular books. So it's obvious there's an interest out there, but I don't have a formula for example, integrating the Martinist stuff that I've been studying more recently, or some of the other French tradition material, with the other things that I've done over the years, other than simply, the standard artistic obsessiveness. I'm going, okay, I'm going to start practicing this stuff daily and see where it takes me. So that's as much of a piece of advice as I have. Keep moving, keep studying, and do your daily practices.
I think, just to build off what he said, and using that framework, a lot of folks are in the Golden Dawn, and increasingly, a lot of folks are in Martinism in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. Because come the 1990s, a lot of the Martinist groups that were barely in existence began to have access to the internet and, of course, grow themselves. Mm-hmm. And we saw connections with Europe growing and different people, trading charters and initiations and all sorts. Again, so by the early mid-2000s, 2010s, this is really strongly rooted, and a lot of folks are able to contact one or more Martinist groups. And since Martinist groups love to pop up like mushrooms, there's always an opportunity to find one. And I say that half jokingly, because that was the problem with the free initiator. Everyone wanted to hurry up and get them and become a free initiator so they could start their own lodge or heptad, and then, of course, start their own group. Because what's not well known is Papu had Martinism, and he had the 3 degrees, which he fashioned, but they had a syllabus, but not teachings. So the teachings that you might get at one heptad might have the syllabus, but they could be very, very different in terms of content than what you might get elsewhere. So this created a lot of opinions. I don't
What a gentle way of phrasing it.
A lot of opinions, diverse views. And of course, too many of the people wanted to be the right way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So within that framework, if we reduce Martinism down to its core idea, what does it claim to be? It claims to be the way of the heart. So we're back to the question of devotion again. So again, then within the magical framework, where is your devotion? Where is your true emotional connection? Because if we say that's from the heart, and if we're going to say that, the true interconnection of Tiferet, or the Holy Guardian Angel, or the inner self is at the heart, then where is that essence? Where does that real? What are you really in love with? That's the real. What are you really in love with? Here, and I saw some Golden Dawn stuff. I think it was the Cicero's, where they had some nice things about Maat, the goddess of truth. Nice. That's really nice, because that's so many things you can go with that. That's a great place to start. So you can integrate the ideas, but if you want to integrate too many practices, mm-hmm. what you have to do is, in this case, you have to take the Vajrayana view, the Tibetan Vajrayana view, and in that you have 2 different views. But I'm going to stay with the more relaxed Nyingma view, old school view. So within that view, as my wife had mentioned last night, you generate the image of the Lama. Lama, hear me. Teacher, hear me. And the reason is hear me. Be aware of me. Be aware of me. Know that I am here. I am paying attention to you. Because without you, how would I have anything? Therefore, if someone did not write this down, if someone did not practice it before me, if someone did not care enough to teach others, it simply would not exist. You can all pray, like they said, the teacher is more important to you because the Buddha's dead. And you have yet to realize your inner clarity. That's why when we look at the priest is in the Catholic tradition, I think the Orthodox too, the priest is seen as, the representative of Christ and to be treated as such. That's their cruder understanding of assumption of the God form. That's their cruder understanding of that Guru Yoga. So within that frame, be aware of me. And then you generate the deity. What is the deity? But it is your ideal. What is your ideal aspiration of how the enlightened energies, or the energies of a pure, unobstructed, uncorrupted, meaning unfiltered by unconscious crap, would manifest? So there's the deity. We like the archetype, but that's such a sloppy word now. That's the other thing about words. You really have to deal with them. What do you really mean by this? Because we use them too often, they become weak and ineffectual. They become a stumbling block. And then as you do the assumption, essentially generation and completion stage, essentially assumption of the God form. You become the deity if it's the highest yoga tantra. If it's not, then it's front generation. You see it before you, which is perfectly fine. That's your rosary. Mm-hmm. If you read the way the rosary is supposed to be done, like a true novena, it's a complete practice in that way. Okay, because of the generation of ideas. And the same thing with the practices of Ignatius Loyola. That there's a strong similarity between that and the practices of Chud. And that's why you don't do those things, but they're real. That's the other thing. It's not just symbolic. There's certain things you don't do in your home. It's not just your own mind. It's working through your mind, but they are real. Okay? So you call the demons and think, oh, it's just my own inner demons of fear and greed. Yes, but they are real. And okay? And then how you do it. But the same thing with the visualizations in Loyola. You visualize yourself undergoing the passions and the pains of Christ. And observing, okay? This is a real evocative path working. So as you generate this, and then you become it, and then you let it dissolve and you rest in it, that's where you have to open yourself up to the inner space, we'll call that's within, where we're rising above, in that alchemical sense, and genuinely, I mean this literally, okay, rising above the murky waters, so that some of that solar light can experience. So we use the symbolism, but I think you can imagine that as I say it and get a sense of it. You are now awake within your own mind. You're no longer being overwhelmed by your own stuff, but you have to get through that. And then, of course, everything dissolves again. Sometimes in reverse, different ways. But the point is, all of this is pointing back to your own inner self. So, if you do that, you're connecting all the dots in your practice, from the very concrete to the symbolic into the inner essence. But you take all of those deities, all of those practices, and you see in your guru, your teacher, all of them. It's not this one, this one, this one, this one. It's everyone. And ultimately, you even then see it through the practice yourself, as we do in the Liturgy of Hermes. Your own inner self is your teacher. We say life is your teacher and yourself, but only if you have clarity to see it. That's the point. So you can integrate all your teachings, all your experiences in the beginning by recognizing them and see them all folding into the meditational deity of choice. And that's where Isis, for she alone confers initiation, is very good. Thoth is very good. As we said, Mat is very good. Any of them, really. But that's how you would do it. That way you don't feel compelled to have this laundry list of practices. Now what the Gelugpa do to get distracted is, for every empowerment you receive, that mantra, you then have a mantra recitation that you have to do every day for the rest of your life thereafter. So these guys may spend 4 hours a day just in mantra recitation. But I'll give you the key thing there. As much as I like the Gelugpa, they're like the Jesuits of this, of Tibetan Buddhism. Because what happens is a lot of them are they're skillful and very wonderful teachers, But I have to say, the joke is, when you want something done, and I know this from direct experience, go find me Enigma. Okay. So you recognize that all these things are present in whoever is teaching you. Everything is all that has brought you to this point. See, and that is the recognition of the interconnectedness, the dimensions of interconnection, which is the fundamental nature of the magical worldview. The fundamental view of the magical world is that things exist. Things change. We can affect that change through the nature of our mind and actions. Okay? And even remember that before you do your ritual work. Otherwise, you just trace some pentagrams. This is a semi-permeable environment I'm in. This is not as it appears. That's what they mean by emptiness. Nothing is as it appears to be. That's the Ein Sof Var, really. And out of the Ein Sof Var arises the point. The point is the beginning, and then the letters come from that, the names come from that, and then the archangels or deities come from that, all the way down to. But it's also going in reverse. So remembering that every time you practice is how you wrap everything into. And then it goes back, that's a devotional practice, it's appreciation, because you're appreciating all the heavy lifting, all those crosses carried by others. So you could find that paperback on a spinner rack at the grocery store. or books on the shelves at a university library. Yeah. Sorry I was lengthy on that, but that's...
Yeah, I for I would say like an introductory level of maybe, let's say, a modern student, because that's a lot of the people that I work with. My students are younger, they're kind of new to this, they got into it via the aesthetic, and kind of want to go further, right? I mean, this is kind of what it is. Same thing with a paperback, right? You always judge a book by its cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
yes, you do.
but
Especially at the mini mart at 12 o'clock at night, it's behind the brown wrapper. You don't need to.
Yeah, exactly. So it's what I find in modern students is that they, in particular, much more so in older students, I find that they're really, really committed to this. I guess what they don't understand is a perceptual filter that is installed through virtually every institution in the modern world. And it's a pair of contact lenses that you don't know you're wearing. And by and large, the root of it, the shape of it, is Cartesian nominalism. Okay, having to categorize and classify everything, and this cannot be that. This is not related. But nothing in nature actually works that way. Nothing is. It is. Keyword is to be. Nothing is as it appears, right? So nothing like that works in the natural world around us. A tree doesn't just provide shade; it's a home. It holds the soil together with its roots. It filters, our gaseous refuse and feeds it back to us as sustenance. Everything is many things, and this comes back to the point of relationship. The magical worldview is one of relationship. It doesn't mean that this thing is that other thing. And that's the problem I find, is that people who are working, I would say simultaneously in several different systems, they're stuck in needing a one-to-one.
Oh, yeah.
They need a one-to-one. This from this system has to be, why? What's your subconscious agenda there? Why do you need these things? To match up completely, entirely. I can't answer that question.
Well,
I can answer it for myself.
Let me suggest this, and I think
Sure.
John and I talked a little bit this.
Sure.
I think it's because of the problem of self-instruction, that when you're reading a book, and of course you're reading some of the other books, there's the presentation too, that what we're doing here is a mechanical technique, that you're pushing buttons, and I won't mention names here, but we all have read a wonderful book by a wonderful occultist who we all love and adore. But, in it when she writes, the Egyptian pantheon, and all these things, and that I said, so I'm going to go do a Golden Dawn ritual with Hebrew divine names, and I'm going to invoke with an Egyptian style, and I'm going to invoke Nordic deities because they're all in your. You see,
And yet that's how the Golden Dawn did it. Okay,
Yeah.
The Golden Dawn is using Kabbalistic Jewish names, Egyptian god forms, Christian symbolism, Greek terminology. It was a complete mashup.
It's a buffet.
No, it wasn't a buffet. It was a complete mashup because you're not picking one of these at a time. You're doing all of them at once.
Yeah.
Which was crazy, but it worked.
but it only worked for a few until it exploded.
Yeah.
I think that's the point. It only worked for 12 years. You know, so when you look at the systems that last beyond 12 years, even with their own problems, they weren't doing that. But they also weren't looking at it as a mechanical technique. And we even have magic referred to as a technology.
Yeah.
As if so people expect to pick up the grimoire, push some buttons, and it's going to work. And it sort of does, but they're now understanding it works in and through you. So when these kids and they're kids, trust me, I'm dealing with them. When they get these grimoires and they think they're going to invoke some demon to go do their stuff, I said, well, okay, so you're going to, are you Catholic? No. Are you even Christian? Not really. So you don't really even believe in this, but you're going to call on the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So no, I'm going to change it, like Crowley did. Okay, but do you believe in that either? You see where the mess is.
Yeah.
So when you take something and you study it and you practice it for, I remember John was asked one, I'll just speak for him, because someone asked him about something and he said, well, look, I did that for 15 or 20 years before I did this. And I've done this for 10 years before I wrote about it. You know, it's not like there's no dilettantism there.
Well,
I
that's
want
key.
to interject another factor here, because I think one of the major reasons that so many people get stuck on these one-to-one things is that they're Americans, and so they only know one language.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, if you have to learn a couple of languages, you will very quickly realize that you can't say exactly the same thing in any two languages. And the more distinct the languages are, I mean, European languages are more or less compatible. God help you if you have to try to, translate them into Hindi or Tagalog or Japanese, good gods, or Native American languages, which are right off in a completely non-Euclidean direction. And because they haven't had that experience, it's a function of one of the many failures of our educational system. They haven't yet had the experience of realizing that words are a very coarse net.
Yeah.
And you need that experience. You need to grasp that there's a difference between the signifier and the signified.
Who was it? I'm trying to remember. Who was it that said, really the best tool for studying spirituality is a dictionary? I'm trying to remember who that was.
I don't recall, but I would say it requires more than one dictionary.
Well, that's it.
There you
And
go.
they should translate it into a different language. It's like the famous attempt to do computer translation back in the 60s, where somebody typed in "out of sight, out of mind." It translated into Chinese and back again, and came out as "invisible idiot."
Yeah, well, I think I might actually have had a little bit of an advantage there because I grew up with a second language in the home, which was Greek. And
There you go.
Phenomenologically, how that influenced the way that I look at stuff is that I reject cognitive dissonance. I reject it because the only reason you feel that way is because either you have an identity tied to one or the other, or it's just because somebody taught you that you can't hold these two ideas without one negating the other. And it's a brilliant thing that you brought that up, because that's how my brain worked with language as a kid. It's like, yeah, there's English and there's Greek, and they're both talking about the same stuff. They're indicating the same stuff, but they're doing them in what we would consider, varying idioms. So when I look at information, I don't need the one-to-one. I'm able to hold to, and this works for materialist scientism and what we kind of do, right? You can hold these two things so that they have their own domains of authority and that they communicate, but one doesn't have to validate or kind of banish the other. They don't have to be resolved into each other. And I'm a like most other people in this room, as John said, I'm a little bit of a freak. I'm a little crazy. So you could see what maybe that would do to a psyche over time. But you really, all joking aside, you learn to be the mediator. You learn to be the mediator and find your own style and understanding of mediation. And I think a lot of this stuff in the modern day is coming to us as philosophy. It's not necessarily coming to a lot of young students as practice. They're hungry for the practice because they're tired of tracing pentagrams in the air and they don't understand it. So they read a ton of the philosophy, and it's not vibing with what they understand about this system or science or so on and so forth. And the thing is that you have to take on the responsibility of mediating this information, and you need to find a new methodological way of approaching this, other than like Highlander, there can only be one. You have to find a way to integrate this stuff, and that's going to be a good teacher can show you how to do that, or at least push your buttons enough to corral you in that direction.
But also simply, I think one of the things we might want to keep in mind, any of you who don't happen to have studied the second language might consider giving it a try.
There you go.
It really does help. It so happened that I took up magic about the same time that I started studying Russian in high school. And that did some strange things.
I think you maybe look at what's connected to this, because we're always looking at relationships and associations. And when you look at something very narrow and concretely, it's like one of my friends used to say, if you look up the word that they use in Hebrew, the word virgin to describe Mary is like number 10 on the list. There's 9 others before it. All of those are related, but they're not the same. There's a connection. There's it's kind of like mother, daughter, sisters, cousins. There's a genetic, we'll say, relationship within the language and the ideas. And that's the same thing when we try to do associations and correspondences. There is a relationship between Odin and Mercury, but they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. So because when we take it, so what is this dynamic notion of things? So when we look up words, and that's what makes Fulcanelli in many ways so difficult, is the knowledge of language was so dynamic, but also what is the subtlety and secondary implications. So within your own dreamscape, within your own mindscape, when you say the words out loud, they will have a different connotation to you than if you're just thinking about the symbolism, if you're just thinking about the dream. So that's why gematria can be so crazy making, because you see this number and all these things are supposed, well, yes, they are connected to it in some way. But maybe you don't need to know all of them or be concerned about all of them. Maybe just for your dream, you can simplify that and just say, I'm going to commit myself to the first one, whatever the first one is. That's the one.
Yeah. How many people here remember the Bible code?
Oh, I do. Michael Drosnin.
Yeah, you remember the Bible code?
Yeah, I remember that.
I have a specific kind of test that I use for systems like that, and it's always very useful. What I did in that case was come up with the Hebrew for Elvis shot JFK and ran it through a Bible code to see how many times it appeared. It appeared like 15 times. So clearly this proves that what was really going on at Dealey Plaza. There's a lot of stuff out there that could really badly use a nonsense filter. And gematria is certainly one of them. I mean, we have all received, I imagine probably many of you have seen, absolutely psychotic documents with people who have convinced themselves that their pet cat is the Buddha who is to come, or what have you, and they've got all the gematria because you the cat's name. Away we go.
How are we on time?
We are over. It's 11:05.
11:05.
Time flies when you're having
So
fun.
do we have any questions from the audience?
None thus far.
Okay, well, we said we would go from about 9:30 to 11. We may have time for one more question, and then we can get everyone home. And for those of you viewing, well, you're already home, so. And I hope you were wearing tie-dye, because not enough of us here were, but hope you weren't.
Or at least you're on acid.
Yeah. One more question, anyway. Yeah.
What would you say the primary sources would be to go to if you want to get more well-versed in theurgy?
So the question is, what sources would you recommend if you want to get more well-versed in theurgy? Here is where you need a really good nonsense filter. I think that's part of magical training. Really is building that radar, because you can spend a lot of money on particularly academic sources, which are great, but they spend 500 or 1,000 words and $300 of your money to say, well, we don't really know.
Brill.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to say it without saying it, but yeah, Brill and other publishers. But the thing is, you want to look at primary documents. Okay, so I don't need, though I love them, I don't necessarily need somebody like Sarah Ellis Johnson and Crystal Laddie, amazing scholars. I don't need them to filter the information for me. They come as like if we're talking buffet, they're a second course, and that's secondary literature, and sometimes tertiary. But I would look at what we have. I would look at the most recent translations where you can get them, of things like On the Mysteries by Iamblichus. I would look at really, really informative as to the underlying worldview, the way that they conceived of what the entities and powers are working with. And it's a relatively short volume. And this one hasn't been recently translated. It's a Thomas Taylor translation I think we're relying on, but Sallust, 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 On the Gods and the Universe, On the Gods and the Cosmos. Really cool thing, too, if you want to get into devotional work there, after you read that, talking about the deities. There's an appendix at the end of that where Thomas Taylor translated, I think, 4 or 5 of Proclus, the Platonic successor, 4 or 5 of his personal hymns to various gods. So that's a great volume. Proclus, on the other hand, like I would start with secondary literature because it's nuts. It's really nuts. A really good introduction to Proclus. And this would be after you digested some of the Platonic stuff. You have to read some of the Platonic dialogues. There are 12 in particular called the Curriculum of Iamblichus. I do that, by the way. I take students through the Iamblichian curriculum. So hit me up if you want to learn more about that. But I would look at, and I'm sure I'll butcher his name, the pronunciation, but Radek, Radek, and the last name's like Chlup, Chlup. He gives a phenomenal introduction to Proclus. And that's a really, really great text for working on that stuff. There are a lot of others. You can message me and I'll give you the really On the Mysteries, Sallust, On the Gods and the Cosmos, the works of Proclus. Those are going to be big staples in theurgy in particular. You have to understand some Platonism because that's the philosophy they're talking about. You have no groundwork if you don't understand Platonism for that. But then out of the newer stuff, I would recommend Jeffrey Kupperman's Living Theurgy. That's a phenomenal book, and he gives some practice. And then P.D. Newman's Theurgy and Practice. So that'll round you off and give you a really nice kind of smattering of stuff that you're doing. But start with the primary literature and then go back through it. Of course, Gregory Shaw is an author is a scholar to look at as well. He compares beautifully Platonic, Neoplatonic theurgy with Tantra, and it's beautiful the correlations that he's able to find. It's very, very, very excellent. The last thing I'll say is I'm working on a 3-volume in one work on theurgy. That I'm going to release. I think this is the first time I'm saying it out loud, but with Anathema Publishing in about a year or two. Yeah, it's called Theophania, the practice and purpose of theurgy. And effectively, I listened to a podcast with a bunch of my friends that were on it. It was a great podcast, and the subject was practical theurgy. And they talked, wonderful conversation for 2 hours, and there was almost nothing about the practice of theurgy. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a damn book, and you'll never need to read another one that somebody wrote before it. Hopefully after it. An ambitious task, so it's taken me like 2 years. But look out for that one. It's like a complete history, theory, and practice of theurgy.
And you heard it here first.
You did. You did.
That Newman
Yeah.
title was Theurgy in Practice?
Yes.
A theurgy and theory in practice.
I actually don't have a great deal to add to that because my division between religion and magic means that I tend to differentiate between the two.
Mhm.
I have my devotional practices
Sure.
and so on, which borrow from Neoplatonic sources. I've been having some interesting experiences with agalmata,
Beautiful.
made in the standard way, but I have my devotional life, and then I have my magical practices, and so classic theurgy isn't something that I've chosen to get into at this point.
Sure.
There is an entire tradition of Martinist Christian and quasi-Christian theurgy,
There you go.
which I am kind of tiptoeing my way into at this point as I get access to more of the initiations and the sources and so on. But I'm certainly not prepared to offer any. I'm not far enough along. Again, give me 10 years,
Yeah.
and I'll actually have something worth saying about that. So,
I think the only thing I'll mention is that what John said here, this separation, it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, what we think of as magic as a daily practice is not correct. Magic was, if you look at least traditionally, it's something you did when you needed something. And then, of course, there's what we call theurgy after that, the theurgy. But on a day-to-day, it was devotional practice and worship.
Devotional practice, worship, and meditation.
Yeah, meditation. And then you needed to do something, and that would be like a secondary practice. So you have your primary practice, you have your secondary practice, which is, health, healing, getting the goats together. And then we might say, if then you have the skill set, the inclination, the possibility, then we would say theurgy. So, well, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank our guests on the panel for their wisdom and time. I'd like to thank everyone for their questions, and just it was a wonderful conference, and I hope to see you all next year. So with that, thank you very much, and we're out.
Somebody get a picture of us, please, and send it to me, okay? Please do that.
Yeah, let's get
I don't
our-
mind sitting still for a little bit.
Yeah, let's get our...
I got one earlier. Meeting ended.
Got it?
So we do the 80s when we go into VHS instead of books.
John vote money and stuff.
You got to twist his arm. He's talked me out of the 80s.
We will have a special evening showing of that.
Hey, thanks.
Hey.
Thanks for
Okay.
for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Glad you were here. Glad you were able to make it.